Three things I wanted to briefly introduce in this section. One is Ryan Knight is talking about the Democratic Party, how it's anti-revolutionary and that it is preserving the capitalist system.
The problem is not that the Democratic Party is weak or that they're cowards. The problem is that they are collaborators. They collaborate with the Republican Party to funnel more money to their corporate donors and to the capitalist class. And so what we have essentially is we have two parties right now, two right-wing capitalist parties who use our government to enrich themselves and enrich their corporate donors, while the American people are falling further and further behind, and while they're also waging endless wars throughout the world and putting crippling economic sanctions on poor and working class people abroad. And so that is what's happening in Washington, D.C. The American people have no representation in our government. Those are just the cold, hard facts. And why I think, for me, actually, I would say the Democrats are more dangerous than Republicans because they stop any real movement to the left. They stop any type of, and they co-opt, look back at every socialist movement or leftist movement in our nation's history. It's always the Democrats who come along and try to co-opt that movement to bring it within the party so then they can water it down and then eventually destroy it. So you have the Democrats who are essentially fighting against leftist policy changes and against kind of the socialist change that we need in this country. And that is, to me, why I feel like they are more sinister in many ways. And, look at, when Donald Trump was putting kids in cages and engaging in endless wars and putting corporations over people and maintaining this decrepit capitalist system, liberals were outraged about it. Well, guess what? The kids are still in cages. The endless wars have continued. Corporations are still coming before people. And this decrepit system is still being propped up. But now it's not Donald Trump who's doing it. It's Joe Biden and the Democrats who control the entire government. And the same liberals who were outraged when Trump was doing this stuff are now not even outraged anymore. They're actually applauding it. They're making excuses, or they're flat out lying and saying, no, there's not kids in cages, when there are.
He's getting a lot of flack from AOC, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez followers, about his criticizing AOC for her not standing up for what she initially said she was going to do in her campaign speeches, Medicare for all, Palestinians, all that kind of thing. She's really abandoned $15 minimum wage, all those different things she's abandoned. Anyway, unfortunately, there's a bit of a cult following of AOC, and so they're all dumping on Ryan Knight on Twitter and trolling him. I got a bit of trolling too. And also, I wanted to say that you've probably heard that there are many, many different sorts of movements now, many sort of troll type, farm type things that are out there changing the narrative, whether it's a military thing. These are actually proven things, like 10,000 people from the defense forces are used to change the narrative to a favorable one for the military. There's all kinds of different trolling happening now, funded, and some of it funded by dark money and that kind of thing. So it's easily, when something is going against the capitalist class, you can find a lot of people will jump on that. If it's somebody who is has a fair following, like a leftist journalist or a journalist who is criticizing AOC or the Democratic Party, there'll be a descending on those people on Twitter would be a whole bunch of people pushing back on that. And some of them can be straight up just cultist followers of AOC and the squad, in quotes. But, I think that there is a certain amount of organized trolling happening. And if I were the Democratic Party, which is a corporate-owned party, ultimately, it's where social movements go to die, I would actually employ an organization to have people go on to threads that are criticizing AOC, criticizing certain people from the squad that they have their eye on for future, like running for POTUS or, running for the President of the United States, all that kind of thing. I would actually have an organized, paid troll-type farm to come in and push against that narrative and to harass the person who is criticizing the likes of AOC. And I point out AOC because I think that at some point she's going to be like the replacement for Bernie Sanders, like the carrot that the corporate Dems shake in front of the masses and say, look how progressive we are. And she may even run for president one day. Of course, she probably will never get to the point of being the the presidential nominee, they'll just do her in like they did Bernie Sanders, sabotaging Bernie Sanders twice. And if AOC is not completely on board with everything that they want her to be on board with by that time, she will be sabotaged as well. But they want to keep these particular progressives, and I put that in quotes because AOC, in my view, is no longer progressive and was questionable when she backpedaled about the Palestinian rights situation straight after she was elected. She was okay, and she was kind of saying pro-Palestinian rights things just prior to being elected, and then after she got elected, she immediately started backpedaling. And I see that as a litmus test to anybody who calls themselves progressive. If you can ditch and abandon one of the most vulnerable human rights issues, like one of the most vulnerable group on the planet, which are the Palestinians, then you can basically sell yourself out for anything. So and she's doing that bit by bit, and it's accelerating too, as she's probably just given up trying to even pretend anymore that she's progressive. I don't know, but anyway, she's got a big following, unfortunately. So that's what I would do. If I was the corporate Democrats in that party, I would be paying somebody to come and push back. And a lot of people, I would be harassing people who are criticizing those particular progressives, because they need them to present this idea that they're some kind of progressive party, when really they're just, as Ryan Knight said, they're they're counter-revolutionary, and they're actually anti-reform, and they want to just preserve the capitalist system as awful and as ecocidal as it is. And the next one I wanted to show is just a tiny snippet of a Status Quo live stream where they were live streaming in Elizabeth City during the Andrew Brown protests. Andrew Brown was executed by the police, one of many black people executed by the police. And the police were sort of like, they're getting more and more that they're trying to basically prevent journalists from recording anything that they do. And they were sort of like pushing, they were probably a bit more polite than other police in Elizabeth City towards John Farina, who is the live streamer for Status Quo.
I mean, the mayor said where media press is exempt from curfew.
Just kind of lead it on to things, man. The press is following them around.
You understand?
You understand that, right? You understand where we're coming from, right?
No, I don't.
Okay.
Why are the press being threatened with arrest?
I'm not threatening anybody with arrest.
No, she is.
The whole night. We've been threatened the whole night.
Okay. But you can understand where we're coming from, though, right?
No.
I don't. That's what we're asking you right now. We're literally standing asking you.
All right. Do you see all the dirt bikes and ATVs running all around that thing all night long? Did you see those? There's a safety issues right there, okay? There's a safety issues.
What's the safety?
With the ATVs.
Now, they're in the carnival. That's fine. We are not with arresting press.
We don't mind the protesters, but with all the other stuff, it makes it a safety issue.
What's the other stuff? That's what we're asking right now.
The dirt bikes, the ATVs, all that stuff, that's a safety issue, okay?
Right. Nobody here has.
I completely understand that. I completely understand. I'm not saying it's y'all. Okay? But you got certain groups that make it unsafe, okay? That's the issue that we're running into.
Anybody here making anything unsafe?
Here's the thing. Everything I understand. I'm not saying it's y'all, okay? I'm not saying it's these people right here, okay? But there's an entity that came in that made it unsafe, okay?
Yeah.
For several days there, it was fine. Everybody's walking the street, happy to block the traffic, happy to, okay? But after the ATVs and dirt bikes, made things really unsafe. We have to do something about it.
Do you think the police officers in riot gear make things unsafe?
No. I think everybody's pretty safe with that.
Let's have a conversation with him, and he's actually having a conversation. He's standing here having a conversation.
I don't think they were unsafe. Nobody got hurt.
Possibly.
I was out there all night long. Everybody's fine. Everybody got bonded out.
Hey, y'all need to leave.
I'm just going to tell you one thing before you head out.
Yes, sir.
Our job is to document what happened,
Yes, sir.
right? Our job is to hold people accountable for their actions,
Okay.
right?
Yes, sir.
By documenting the truth,
Okay.
right? We cannot do our jobs from home,
Okay.
right? The mayor and the governor exempt media members from that. That's our job.
All right.
You good?
You need to leave, sweetheart.
I'm not your sweetheart, yo. I'm not your sweetheart.
Okay, y'all need to
Have a sweetheart.
We're trying to get the report.
Get out of here, man. All right? Y'all gotta go. All right? Y'all gotta move. Y'all gotta move. All right? Y'all gotta move. Y'all gotta move.
Do you agree with this use of force against peaceful protesters?
All I'm saying is y'all got to get out of the area.
I understand.
Curfew violation, man. Y'all got to get out of the area, all right?
Do you think the curfew created this violence?
Where's your vehicle located?
It's somewhere around here.
Somewhere around here. You
I'm
want
gone.
to get to your
I'm
vehicle,
gone.
all right?
But I noticed that this is something I wanted to point out about this is that I noticed that more and more police are recording journalists and taking photos of them, videoing them at these particular protests and videoing people, protesters. And I think that is a very ominous sign that they're doing that. And I think that's going to be used at some point. The more and more that the US becomes sort of fascistic, the more that sort of documentation of leftist protesters, BLM protesters, and left journalists, independent journalists, that they're going to be used against those people, either for identification to round them up and to imprison them or whatever. But I feel that this is a very ominous sign that, I saw a woman actually recording the journalist and the people, some of the black people there that were actually walking home from the protest. She was actually taping them on her cell phone. The last thing I wanted to point out was, now I'm not recommending The Hill or The Rising, which has Sagar and Getty, definitely not Sagar and Getty, and Crystal Ball. Crystal Ball, I haven't quite made my mind up about Crystal Ball, but being on that show with Sagar and Getty, who tends to be conservative, pushes the anti-China narrative and all of that, I find the whole thing suspect. But anyway, she did this good little segment on Bill Gates and how he's preventing the patent release of the COVID vaccines for poorer countries like India, and he's making excuses for it. But really, what it is just greed, and this sort of shows Bill Gates in his true light. And she does a good spiel about that. And I'll see if I'll either show you the part of the segment, or just certain excerpts of the segment, and I think she does a fairly good wrap-up and a fairly good expose of Bill Gates. He is problematic, and I don't know why he's been nominated as the COVID vaccine czar, the vaccine czar of the world. I mean, he's a businessman. It's ridiculous, but there you go. And he's also bought up huge amounts of land, agricultural land in the United States. That's another ominous sign. He and Jeff Bezos have done that. Probably Elon Musk, I'm not sure, but they bought up huge amounts of land. And as that saying goes, if you control the food, you control the people. So anyway, I'll show you that bit by Crystal Ball on Rising, talking about Bill Gates and the patent for the COVID vaccine. And please note, I'm not endorsing The Hill. No, sorry, I'm not endorsing Rising.
So as you know, while the U.S. is doing pretty well on vaccine administration, with half of U.S. adults having received at least one dose, poor countries are in truly desperate shape. Somewhere around 3/4 of vaccine doses have been administered in just 10 high-income countries. Over 100 countries have yet to administer their very first dose. India, of course, has become the new ground zero for exploding COVID cases. The U.S. just recently lifted an embargo on the raw materials needed to help make COVID vaccines in that country and to improve their vaccination rates. But in general, it's a mess. And it's a mess for basically one simple reason: greed. Pharma wants to keep their profits high, and they have aggressively lobbied their home countries in the U.S. and in the EU to make sure that they can achieve that goal, protecting their patent monopolies so that generic versions of their life-saving vaccines cannot be manufactured, which would both increase supply and lower the cost. They have had an extraordinarily powerful ally in that fight to protect their bottom line: human lives be damned, our own supposed savior of global public health, Bill Gates. Now, Gates has been pushing a solution to poor nation vaccine distribution that conveniently protects pharma profits. That is the COVAX program through the World Health Organization, where rich countries donate to secure doses for middle-income and low-income nations. Sounds good maybe in theory, but in practice, it's been a joke. They set a goal of 2 billion doses, which would still, by the way, be insufficient to meet the need. But they have instead provided a pathetic 38 million doses. Has this dramatic underperformance led Bill Gates to rethink his approach? Because let's not kid ourselves, by dint of his money and his connection, he has essentially appointed himself the unofficial world czar of public health. The answer of whether he's rethought it is, of course, not a chance. In an interview on Sky News, Bill Gates was asked whether it would be helpful to lift vaccine patent protections in order to increase access. Here is his answer.
There's been some speculation that the changing intellectual property rules and allowing these vaccines, as you say, the recipe for these vaccines to be shared would be helpful. Do you think that would be helpful?
No.
Why not?
Well, there's only so many vaccine factories in the world, and people are very serious about the safety of vaccines. And so moving something that had never been done, moving a vaccine from, say, a J&J factory into a factory in India, that it's novel. It's only because of our grants and our expertise that can happen at all. The thing that's holding things back in this case is not intellectual property. There's not like some idle vaccine factory with regulatory approval that makes magically safe vaccines. You've got to do the trials on these things, and every manufacturing process has to be looked at in a very careful way. There's all sorts of issues around intellectual property having to do with medicines, but not in terms of how quickly we've been able to ramp up the volume here. I remember how shocked people were when we said we were going to do second sources in these developing country factories. That was a novel thing. And we got all the rights from the vaccine companies. They didn't hold it back. They were participating. I do a regular phone call with the pharmaceutical CEOs to make sure that work is going at full speed.
So let's just unpack what he says there. His argument is that lifting patent protections will not help the supply problem whatsoever, so it's better to just stay the course and produce at the current level and hope that eventually rich countries donate enough money and surplus vaccines that poor countries get taken care of. In his words, it's not like there's some idle vaccine factory with regulatory approval that makes magically safe vaccines. Oh, really? I present to you this article from the AP. In an industrial neighborhood on the outskirts of Bangladesh lies a factory with gleaming new equipment imported from Germany. Its immaculate hallways lined with hermetically sealed rooms. It's operating at just a quarter of its capacity. It is one of 3 factories that the AP found on 3 continents whose owners say they could start producing hundreds of millions of COVID-19 vaccines on short notice if only they had the blueprints and the technical know-how. I present also to you John Fulton, president of BioLease in Canada, who says he could be making millions of doses today if the know-how had been shared. We've been passed over. We've got this production capacity and it's not being put to use. If we had started this last year, we could have shipped millions of doses by now. This is supposed to be like a wartime effort, everyone in it together, but that does not seem to be the case. And finally, I present to you the words of Manuel Martin, a policy advisor to Doctors Without Borders. The Gates organization dampened early enthusiasm by saying that IP is not an access barrier in vaccines. That's just demonstratively false. Demonstratively false. Bill Gates is lying to you when he says that lifting patent protections will not help with access. Now look, it may not magically fix everything, nothing is a cure-all, but it is a root cause of the problem, and it would help to ease the supply issue so that poor countries can start vaccinating, and we can all avoid the horror of watching the virus mutate to the point where it jumps the current vaccines. Bill Gates, with his billions, set the course for how global vaccine distribution would unfold, and now millions of people around the world are paying the price. Now, for those who've been tracking Gates' actions in the public health space for decades, these new comments will come as absolutely no surprise, as journalist Alexander Zaitchik writes over at TNR. Since Gates got involved in the AIDS epidemic in Africa in the late 90s, he has cultivated close relationships with big pharma execs, lauded their wonderful and noble efforts, and aggressively pushed industry-friendly policies with regards to patents. This significantly set back access to AIDS antiretroviral therapies, and it has been a disaster for COVID vaccine access. Gates' pro-industry stance also should come as no surprise, given that the man is a billionaire uber capitalist who made his own ill-gotten fortune by novel exploitations of patent law and unchecked monopoly power. Now, he may sincerely want to cure disease and make the world a better place. He also has a sincere ideological commitment to protecting monopolies and profit margins for some of the world's worst actors, and that he doesn't seem to care what the consequences are. He and pharma argue that patents help foster innovation, which creates the life-saving drugs that we all benefit from. This, too, is largely a lie. every new drug developed over the past decade was funded by U.S. taxpayers. The revolutionary mRNA technology that pharma is so worried about monopolizing now was developed by university researchers and scientists at the NIH and the Department of Defense. Now, I know we've got a complicated love-hate relationship with billionaires in this country, but maybe, just maybe, it is not such a great idea to outsource global public health policy to a rapacious monopolist. Maybe, just maybe, it's not such a great idea to outsource labor market conditions and unionization rates to another rapacious monopolist at Amazon. Maybe we shouldn't be outsourcing free speech and censorship to another set of monopolists in Silicon Valley. Perhaps these men are good people. Maybe they're not good people. Maybe they're well-intentioned. Maybe they're not. But no one voted for them to be king of the world. They are totally unaccountable to a single soul. And every one of them is committed to existing power because they are existing power.
Thanks so much for watching. My name's Trish Roberts. You're watching Faint Signals from Viga. Till next time, bye for now.